Lesson will take just a few minutes to explore our starting scene file within Maya. Okay, so this is the scene that we're going to be starting with. So what you can see is that really we're just going to be working with a relatively simple piece of geometry. This is just sort of a stand-in for a human head and a human face. And what this will allow us to do is really just concentrate all of our attention into this eye area. Right, now as we mentioned in the introduction, the eyes are very, very important. And it's even important in a CG character, especially one that you're trying to make as realistic as possible. So in the real world, whenever we talk and communicate with people, we always focus on the eyes. We always have a tendency to look people in the eye. Now, we also have a tendency to do this with people that we would see on television or in movies. We have a tendency to look that character in the eye. And the same is true for a CG character. So if the eyes don't look real, immediately we could tell, even if it's on a subconscious level, that something just doesn't look quite right. So we need to take special care and start to pay some special attention in this eye area. Now let's go ahead and just take a quick render at what we have currently in this scene. You can see that I already have a few things that have been set up for us. So you can see I've already taken the liberty of setting up things like a basic skin shader. This is just using the Mental Ray subsurface scattering material. And I already have just a little bit of basic light set up. So this is just using a couple of simple area lights. And we also have a basic environment, which is responsible for these reflections that we see here. All right. So really this is going to give us a chance now to just focus on the eye area. So we really won't focus on how to build realistic skin. This really won't be a course on how to set up any kind of lighting. Really this, like I said, is just going to focus strictly on the texturing and the rendering and a few material tips and tricks that we can start to use for the eye area. All right. So just to kind of explain a little bit more about the particular environment that I'm using, this is just a basic high dynamic range image, and this is mapped into an environment lookup node. And if I take a look inside the materials tab, this is the MIB lookup spherical node. This is connected into a Mental Ray texture, which has the high dynamic range image plugged into it. And this has just been plugged into the camera inside the Mental Ray environment node. Okay? So if you want to learn a little bit more about this node and just how it works, you could always refer to this in our Mental Ray online reference. Now, one of the things that I like to set up as far as my eyes go is I actually like to use two distinct surfaces. So this is what I have set up currently in my scene, is we have basically an outer surface. Now this is what's responsible for the actual reflections that we see on this outer part. This is basically just a clear shell and is really just responsible for nothing but the reflections. Inside of this we have another sphere. Now this is what will actually hold the color information for our eye texture once we come in and start to paint this. So this is my particular preferred way of doing this. So one thing to keep in mind though is that just like anything else, this is by no means the only way to do an eye. So if you have your own methods or if you'd like to experiment a little bit further on your own, by all means feel free. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is actually take these two pieces of geometry and actually start to create some UVs for these, so that way we can actually start to take these into Photoshop and start to paint right on top. So let's start with this outer eye surface. I'm going to go ahead and jump to my 4-panel view and switch to the front view. Let's go ahead and now go to Create UVs, Planar Mapping. Let's go over to the options. All right, and let's adjust a few of these. We could either set this to project along the Z-axis, which is what we're currently looking down in this front view, or we could also just set this to a camera, which means it will automatically project based on whatever angle we happen to be viewing it at. So this is my preferred method here, and we'll also tell this to make sure that we keep the height and width ratio. All right, so with these two options, let's go ahead and project. All right, now you can see that we do have the UVs that have been applied to this. If we take a look inside the UV texture editor, there we go. All right, so let's go ahead and just export these. So let's go to Polygons, UV Snapshot. All right, and let's go ahead and choose the actual file that we're going to output. So we'll call this something like Outer Eye UV. There we go. And for the size, I'll make this 1024 by 1024. And for the image format, we can choose something like a bitmap. Alright, everything else should be just fine. Once we're done, go ahead and press OK. And now you can see we have our UV snapshot that's been exported. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now and just take this outer eye, and for the time being, I'll put it on its own layer. I'll just name this something so we can actually keep track of it. What this will let me do is just temporarily hide this or unhide it whenever I need to, and this will just give me a little bit easier access to this little inner part of the eye. So let's do the exact same thing for this. With this inner eye selected, I'll jump to my front view, create UVs, do another planar mapping. Alright, excellent. Let's go back to the texture editor. You can see now we have a nice front planar projection on this. Just like before, let's go to Polygons, UV Snapshot. And for this, we'll call it something like Inner Eye UV. Save that out. Again, 1024 by 1024. We'll make this just a simple bitmap or any format that you want. Press OK. And there we go. So now we're at a point where we can actually jump into Photoshop and begin the process of the texture painting. Alright, so within Photoshop, we can take a look inside our Realistic Eyes project. If we take a look inside the Images folder, you can see here's the different UV snapshots that we just output. So let's start with this Inner Eye UV. Alright, you can see by default Maya will create this in a way that is basically a black document with these white UV highlights. So what I like to do is actually start by basically inverting this. So if I were to press Control-I on my keyboard to invert this image, you can see now this will give us the black outlines, which I find to be actually just a little bit easier to work with. Right, so what we can start to do now at this point is we're basically ready to begin the process of hand painting a texture within Photoshop that's going to look almost indistinguishable from a real eye. So we'll begin that process now in our next lesson.